Hi, everyone. I'm Roger Mannix, co-founder and chief creative officer at Ludolo. We are a play-based learning company that sparks innovation, strengthens culture, and fosters human connection, all while developing emotional and social intelligence. We're also a fast company world-changing idea in education. We're doing a series of interviews with organizational leaders to help better understand and shape the future of learning and development initiatives. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with David Wilson, Principal Vice President and Chief Innovation Officer at Bechtel Corporation. Hello, David.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hi. Bechtel is one of the most respected global engineering, construction, and project management companies. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You got it. I'm going to jump right in. First question. What did you play as a kid? Was there a go-to or a favorite game that you like to play?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So I grew up and I'm an only child. Both my parents worked, so I spent a ton of time at my grandparents' house. And so I played for everything from fix the sprinkler system for my grandfather to paint the garage to build model planes. And at the time when you're growing up, you don't it's just a lot of fun to do all those things, play with the tools, use the saws, be treated as an adult, and you don't realize at the time that you're effectively labor for your grandparents. But it was a great experience, and it really opened, really felt like I was empowered to kind of try things and do things. And so I really just loved the chance to fix things and to understand how they worked. And so that was largely my play, was staying busy with hands and thinking and trying to break stuff apart and put it back together.
Tinkering. It's such an important part of our growth. It's funny, my dad is a chef, so he owned a restaurant when we were growing up. So I thought it was always fun to play waiter, but really I was just my dad's free worker for about 10 years there. So
Exactly.
I get it.
But it's a great time. I mean, you just don't, you have a lot of fun being, like I said, treated as an adult and figuring things out and not being necessarily protected from making mistakes and learning, right?
Yeah, because I mean, listen, if we're being protected from making mistakes while we're learning, then FYI, we're not learning.
Agreed. Totally agree.
Yeah. And what about today? Do you play today? Do you still play today? What might that look like?
Yeah, so the play today is a little bit of a mix of with my kids, and that's everything from outside in the backyard kicking the ball around to throwing the ball around with my sons to watching them play soccer and grow up, and then it drifts into video games. I've got boys, so that's kind of they're both very into video games and into computers, and so some of that's just be invested in what they're doing, understand what they're playing. So they're teaching me things like Hearthstone, right? It's a card game, so it's everything from the modern day chess and checkers and some of the games that they play, and how does that stimulate the thinking, but also create a connection. And I found that play at home and play with friends is it's one about stimulating the brain, but it's also going and playing with my kids is a way to create a connection that I wouldn't otherwise get a chance to do.
Yeah, on both levels, it's sort of deepening our community, our community with our family, our community with our friends who are also an extended part of our family as well too. And the kid answer is like a staple for this question when we answer it. Kids have this real playful instinct that keeps us in ours. But I think somewhere along the lines, while we were growing up, someone said, cut it out, stop that, stop playing, don't do that anymore, which was a real, I think, unfortunate and pivotal time in our education. So I'm glad to hear the boys are prompting you well.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think we watch as we unfortunately educate out creativity and play, which I think it is. We're missing something. And I actually grew up as an artist in school and drawing and being creative in that fashion, and just gradually as that converted into engineering, probably did less of that than I was accustomed to. And I think that how do we incorporate both is really a great question.
That's fascinating. So you grew up as an artist and drawing, and then you found your way into engineering. That's funny. I was great at math, so I went to school and studied math, and then civil engineering, and then that just turned into math and theater. So I get having both sides of the brain going on there.
Yeah, it brings a lot. I think you basically see it, having the math and the theater, gives you just a different perspective to approach things in the corporate world, or as you try to solve business problems. That the ability to tell stories that I'm sure the theater brings to the table, or communicate visually, or through words, is so critical to influencing and leading and helping stimulate organizational change.
Agreed. Both sides of the brain I want coming to work, never just the left or the right hemispheres.
Completely. Yeah.
So we understand every organization is different. What's your role as Chief Innovation Officer at Bechtel? And then maybe tell us a little bit about the team or the teams that you lead.
Yeah. So I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Bechtel, as you mentioned, and the role there is to, my view of it and the mandate is to stimulate and facilitate innovation in the organization. So how do we create the processes, the structure, the space, the time to encourage the employees of the organization to innovate, to create, to look at new problems and solve them? It's not, my role is not to have a small team that does the innovation for the organization, but my small team of about 10 is structured to create the means and mechanisms and help develop the skills of the organization to further innovate, to take that innovation and develop it and deploy it on our projects, so we can help our projects execute safer, better, faster, leaner. And so I see every day as how do we create the framework, how do we help prepare people with the tools, how do we challenge them to stretch and develop, and how do we engage them in that process and participate so that they can see that they can be creative and innovative. And one of the messages we share with the organization is, creativity, yes, some people inherently are, have more creativity just out of the box, but it's largely a muscle that's developed and
Mm-hmm.
grown and worked on. And so if you don't feel like you've got it, that doesn't mean you can't have it, you can't develop it. And yes, I use fitness all the time as an example. In some cases, it's like leg day. You just got to keep working it because it's
Mm-hmm.
there and it needs to be developed, and there are things you can do, and don't be worried if it's not a great idea out of the gate. Just keep working and shaping and sharing. And so that's kind of my job in the organization, is to help mold that and encourage that and protect that, and then create ways for that to then lead into how do we execute differently.
I use the gym analogy all the time as well, David, and I constantly say, listen, I'm not fit because I go to the gym once a month. It requires dedication. It requires practice, as any sort of skill would. So it goes hand in hand with this idea of, creativity as a leg day. What might something like that look like when you're talking about kind of creating the environment to foster the creativity or to spark the innovation? What might that look like?
Yeah, so part of it's setting the expectations as we ask for the organization to participate, and saying, early we want a volume of ideas. We want quantity or quality early, just to get you thinking and get you engaged and developed. And part of that is as you probably know, in any brainstorming session, you want to deplete the ideas on the surface, or kind of top of mind, so that you can push people to stretch to the deeper ideas, or the more creative component. And so part of just getting all the ideas out is to deplete it, and then really get into the stretching and into the development of more insight and more solutions. And so that's one aspect. The other one we tell people is, the crazier the better, because it's
Mm.
much easier to take a seemingly crazy idea and walk it back into a genius or largely disruptive idea. Then it's much easier to do that than it is um, ever feasible to really walk kind of a mundane or incremental idea to genius. So it's much harder to walk that incremental to genius than it is to take a crazy and walk it back to genius. And so helping people understand that's been pretty critical. And then we use examples. And so consistently talk about some of the examples we've seen in the organization, things like inflatable scaffolding and artificial clouds. Both sound incredibly ridiculous, but when you start to look at the idea and understand it and understand the principles of it, you realize, well, there might actually be something there. And so helping people understand that and kind of go through that process and share examples has been pretty effective.
Mm. And it also sounds like not only is the real gymnasium being put into place for the workout of the creativity, but also setting the tone for a culture of kind of psychological safety and support, where people feel kind of included and safe to share their ideas as well.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly. And not really getting away from ringing the no button or the idea killer button. When people hear things, and kind of setting aside the space so that you can share ideas, and not people aren't going to immediately start to assess the merit of the idea until all the ideas are out, and breaking that down and get into a process. Get it all out before you assess, and get people really focused on the ands as opposed to the no's, right?
Yep. A lot of what you're talking about, I'm hearing, has curiosity in it, and curiosity is a core element of creativity, and they both fuel innovation. And this goes sort of piggybacking on that last question of like, what are you currently doing now to drive curiosity or to drive creativity within the organization?
Yeah, the curiosity one, told you know we've told people to be more. Part of it's instructing folks to just be more aware of some of the things that we become numb to. So the things that may annoy us, the things that may drive us crazy in the day to day, keeping a diary of maybe the things that we've historically complained about, but maybe are now accepting as the norm. You start that diary of those things that just drive you crazy,
Hmm.
and then use that as a good starting point to innovate or to create, because in some instances we've just gotten numb to it because we accept it. So how do you not accept it as a prompt to be more creative, or ask the question about why do we do it this way, and could we do it a different way? And so one's creating that prompt of understanding, where might there be areas to create or innovate. And then the other one is, what do you do, be more aware of what do you do in your personal life, or what are your interests and your hobbies, and you start to think about where can that maybe seemingly random uh, personal pastime or interest intersect with that problem or other problems, and maybe that creates something new that you weren't thinking of, or it didn't think was within your division of responsibility. And so telling folks not to limit the problems you see and the things you think or the way you create to what you do on a day-to-day necessarily. Get outside your swim lane and understand what's happening, but also look for intersections between, what do you do the other 16, 14, 16 hours of the day. How do some of those solutions and things that you work with intersect, whether it's cooking? I mean, there are things you can learn from cooking, there's things you can learn from painting, there's things you can learn from music, from
Mm-hmm.
whatever your hobby is.
Mm-hmm.
There's something in each of those that you can learn and apply and translate into potentially solving a problem at work, or something that maybe you didn't think you could create. But if you have your awareness up and your eyes open, you might see something new that you hadn't recognized previously.
That's great. I do this exercise when I teach, where I have everyone in the room look around, and I just say, tell me everything in the room that's red. Just make a list in your head. Don't say it out loud, but quick, quick, quick. Everything that's red in the room. And they do that. And they go, close your eyes. And they do. And then I say, okay, now tell me everything that's blue. And the room is like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because we're only looking for the red, but the blue is always there. So, when you start to see it, then you know that it's all there. And you're also talking about a key component of emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness. And for people to give themselves the time to have self-awareness and self-reflection, to sort of see, I often say how I do something is how I do everything. So if I can start to incorporate possibly, this quote unquote, what's going on outside of work, because that's work as well, I may be able to help myself find an answer. That's a great idea. And then maybe, is there a specific time or that you can share about when you had a team really hit a block, or they were having a hard time overcoming something that an example of that you might be able to share?
Yeah, so it's a few years old. It's not recent, but it just still sticks out with me. So we one of the problems with construction or challenges is that in some instances design or the information is done by others. So we call it vendor information. So if we've got a piece of equipment or we have a component that's provided by a vendor, it's getting the information from them and then getting it in a format that we can incorporate into our design and into our work practices. And so all that means is that it gives construction what they need to go execute and build. And so it's a challenge to get that in a format that's consumable. And so we had a group that was trying to tackle that problem and look at it differently. And so we used a tool, an innovation tool in in the general toolkit that's called random stimulus and forced association. So we picked a random word, a random object that had no conceivable application to vendor information. I think the one we used was toll roads, I think was the one that we used as an example. And it wasn't even the most obscure. We've used like pink pigs as an example in the past. But we took it and we listed all of the attributes of that random stimulus and what are the characteristics of and this, I use pink pig as an example. What are the characteristics of it? Describe it, and then for every one of those characteristics, we had the team brainstorm a possible solution for vendor information that mapped back that same characteristic. And not everything was a hit. Sometimes some are pretty obscure and pretty
Yeah,
random.
of course.
But it got the team thinking. It got them out of that rut of, well, we've always done it this way, or here's how we should solve it. And it broke that cycle or that pattern or that going back to fitness. It broke that muscle memory and really opened them up to see it differently. And from that, we were able to spin into a further brainstorming, and we just got all sorts of random and crazy ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of broke it broke through the gate or the water gate, and there was just a volume of things that we could then work with and start to shape and develop where they had been stuck before. And so that's one of the examples that always sticks out with me of, and every group I've used it with always responds to saying, well, this will never work. You could
Mm-hmm.
never take a random thing and connect it back to what we're doing, but it always works. And so
Mm-hmm.
that type of thing has been really effective at breaking people out of the rut and getting them to look at it differently. And we had success in finding a handful of solutions because of it.
What you're talking about is play. And
Exactly.
being playful. And what play does is it frees us from established patterns. Play is the cornerstone of innovation and creating new neural networks. And when brainstorming is going well, it's very similar to play with these crazy ideas, and there's a diminished sense of self and time is going by. But the catalyst for all of that is about really moving us from the known into the unknown. So something different has an opportunity to manifest. And I find play is like that because it trains us with being comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, because those are givens in any, life, whether at home or at work. I got two last questions. One is, what would you say are the top 5 skills that you look for when assembling a team?
Yeah, so I easily would be the diversity of experience and thought because it prevents the group think. I think that's kind of top on the list. The other ones I would look for would just be the willingness to kind of put yourself out there and share ideas and not be fearful of contributing. So kind of welcoming and being a contributor to, but also an embracer of the psychological safety that you mentioned. Just people that are able to kind of be creative and be crazy and kind of challenge the status quo. And then there's the ability for folks to, once you get past that, to adapt it and then really push it through and drive something to completion. So it's kind of a mix of
Mm-hmm.
the diversity of thought, the willingness to put yourself out there and be uncomfortable, and then the willingness to, once something is developed, to grasp it and to run with it and deploy it. So you need that balance. And we look at it, adaptives and creatives. You need a mix, and really there's 3 that we look at. There's the adaptives, the creatives, and there's the glue or the bridgers that kind of can vacillate between those two. You need that triad of personalities in the group so that you can get really creative and really out there, but then you bring it back to something at the end of the process, into something you can deploy and do something with in advance, because otherwise you spiral into chaos, which is okay for a time. If you have too many adaptives, you focus more on actions and action item lists, which get you into the spiral of diminishing returns. So it's that balance of those personalities and those thinking approaches that I think are pretty critical. So those are a couple of the things that I look for in groups is that balance, that willingness to be uncomfortable, that diversity of thought, and then the mix of personality types, adaptives and creatives.
That last is so important. It sets them up for success as well too. You got to have a nice keen eye to support them and have that balance. And you bring up willingness a lot. And when I facilitate play experiences, I often say, willingness is the one thing I can't give you. So, if you come with willingness, we're going to have a really big shot. But if there's no willingness, boy, we're going to have a hard time here collaborating together. So my last question, it goes back to our initial question of you tinkering with your grandparents' sprinkler systems. When you shared about that sort of play as a kid, what skills did that play develop, which have been useful throughout your career?
I'd say it's just being okay not knowing and just trying to figure out how things work, and how being okay not knowing how it's going to work, and not knowing what we're going to do, but just kind of figuring it out. So I think it's that tinkering, that figuring things out, by doing, I think has been largely helpful and beneficial in my career, because, yeah, we're going to try, maybe it won't work, but we're going to figure this thing out. And I think that, one of the things that, as you look at people in organizations, is there are those that kind of get where they're at by learning and developing and seeking and putting in kind of developing through action and through doing, that will largely be adaptive and amenable to change. And then there are those that kind of learn or get to where they've gotten by perfecting one thing. And so when you focused on the perfection of one thing, you're much less adaptive and malleable. But when you're put in situations where you don't know, you're not the expert, and if you're okay with that, I think it leads to better questions, and it leads to the curiosity we talked about, that I think opens you up to exploring new solutions, and being open to being wrong. I think that's a huge piece of it.
Having the resilience within that as well too. And I love this. It still maintains how play brings us to the unknown, and to sort of explore that on our own and with others as well. This has been, I could keep talking forever, David, but I want to be mindful of our time. I'm really grateful that you shared this past 20 minutes with us. So thank you really a lot for your insights and your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the discussion.
Yeah, and we at Ludolo believe that collaborative play is nature's greatest teacher to train the mind and body, and what it means to be human in our digital age. So with that, I leave our listeners, and I hope you have a great day, and look forward to hearing more about playful and curious times over at Bechtel.
Thanks, Roger.
You got it. So long.